Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for joining today. I'm Steve Jones. I'm the Senior Director of Industry Research and Insights for Dodge Data and Analytics, and we're here to talk today about how architects and contractors really select building products. And we get involved in doing research about a lot of topics in the industry, and this particular one is very interesting because I don't think that there's been a whole lot of research done on this. I think this is one of those multi-party workflows where there's a lot of conventional wisdom. I think people assume that how they see it going is pretty much how everybody sees it. Now, I was in architecture for almost 20 years and certainly dealt with lots of building products. And I got to tell you, I was pretty surprised by some of the findings and really fascinated by them. So let me take you through how it is we went through the process, our methodology on this. We talked to 170 architects and asked them a series of questions about how they go about, what the influences are, and how they go about making decisions to select very specific products. We also then asked contractors about what's involved in their workflow as they receive these products in plans and specifications from architects, and then how they go about actually making final decisions about buying and what their influences are. Then for contrast, we asked building product manufacturers what their belief is about the questions that we were asking the architects and the contractors. So it's actually really interesting to get both sides of that perception. So the way we've structured this today is we found 9 areas where we think that there's a pretty interesting disconnect actually in those perspectives. And so we wanted to try and expose that so that all of us can have a more common understanding about how these processes work. So we call this uncovering the myths. So the first one is about perception by building product manufacturers that once a project started, an awful lot of those decisions have already been made about products. Now I know from my 20 years, I certainly would begin a project, especially if it's one I'd done before. My firm did a lot of healthcare, we did a lot of higher ed. I had things that I was comfortable using, and I was probably thinking, yeah, geez, that's been successful in the past. I'll probably try and work that into this project again, but not necessarily all the time. So actually what we showed here when we looked at the results, you'll see here consistently throughout that we're going to contrast what the architects told us versus what the building product manufacturers imagined that the architects were going to say, essentially what their perspective on things are. And you can see there's really quite a bit of difference here, where a third, almost, of the BPMs are imagining that, geez, when a project starts, a huge number of these things have already been pre-selected. More than 75% of these things have been pre-selected, and there's very little room to try and wedge your way in. When in fact, architects are saying, 8% are saying that they're approaching it that way, and then you see that shift as it goes along. So really, there's in many ways far more opportunity to introduce products that aren't familiar or haven't been used before by an architect on a project than the BPMs are initially thinking is there. So what we see here is an opportunity for building product manufacturers, where your marketing and sales effort to get architects' attention definitely shouldn't stop once a project started. And in many ways, this is a prime opportunity to begin to talk about what it is you have to offer, because you can now make it very specific to a real project being done by that team. The second one was this idea that, well, an architect's really only going to want to work with a product that he or she has used before. And when we looked at the statistics that we got back, indeed, I have used it before was certainly very strong, okay? But, we asked them for what some of the other important influencing factors are. And as you can see, that's not the whole story. And actually scoring almost as strongly is, if you can come in and tell me that you've got a product that meets my technical specifications for this, that's really going to satisfy the technical requirements, I am all ears, okay? And I thought that this was a very powerful finding, right? Sometimes you do get into a situation where there's a firm standard, right? A little bit fewer architects were saying that that's a driver than manufacturers thought there was. Or perhaps there's, an owner standard. Having dealt with a lot of healthcare, I know that we dealt with a lot of owner standards on that. I think there's a little bit more prescribed by BPMs than it was in reality. And then this idea of, I haven't ever used it before. I've learned about it. I've heard about it. I'd like to try it. Although that scored relatively low, you can see it was around 50% more. The architects are open to that. So there's an opportunity here, as we see it, where what you really want to do is, again, present that technical data in an accessible format. Do case studies. People like to see where it's been used before. They like to see reputable firms using it. They like to see it being used on the kinds of projects that they're familiar with and that they're facing, right? Set up lunch and learn programs. I mean, those showed in the results here to be extremely powerful and strong. So, this is a good way to arm your sales team. Again, get people to try and think about products that they aren't necessarily familiar with and haven't used before. So then there was this idea that, geez, architects really aren't that interested in new products, right? We got that pretty strongly from building product manufacturers, but the data showed, hey, I value BPM expertise in helping me to select building products. That came out very strongly. Where it differed a little bit, as you see in that second set of findings there, around trusting the major brand, I think there was a little bit more belief, actually, by the building product manufacturers that the brand would carry the value proposition forward a little more strongly. Not dramatically, but still, that's a pretty significant difference there versus what the architects are feeling. Then when you look at the statements like, my firm encourages me to really look at research and find out about new products, right? Boy, BPMs were not perceiving that that's the case, whereas over half the architects are saying, absolutely that's the case. This is part of what I do. It's part of my job to know about these things. I'm encouraged to do that, right? And then you get into some of the reasons for that. There's really just adequate information online. I don't really need to talk to anybody. I can do this stuff myself. And actually that did come out fairly consistent across both those parties. But then this perception that architects just don't have the time to research products, well, okay, 39% said, yeah, that's true for me, but at least 60% are saying that does not apply to me, versus almost all the building product manufacturers are imagining that that's the truth. And it's these sorts of things that we like to try and help all parties to understand that really there's much more of an open door here than perhaps is being perceived by the folks who have the products. So what's the opportunity out of all this? So a good way to think about this is you really want to avoid generic selling. It's important to try and understand the architect's problem they're facing on a specific project, right? And then say, look, let's talk about the specific project that you have, and let me see how I can convince you and help you understand how my product actually really specifically addresses the problem that you're facing on your project. Now, interesting question here around what the influencing factors are, right? Salesforce versus some other things. And you can see here now we also began to ask contractors because the contractor is in a position where basis of design, or in some cases generic specifications, come to them, and it's their job to actually make the final purchasing decision. In some cases, they'll recommend something else, and discussions take place on that. In some cases, it's an open spec, a generic spec. They get full reign as long as the shop drawing gets approved. So we dug into this a little bit here to see, all right, what are these influencing factors that seem to actually really be moving the needle? And those lunch and learn sessions, as I mentioned before, scored really strongly with architects. And the BPMs actually saw them as being less effective, or they believed that architects think that they're less effective. And I think that's a very important takeaway. There's nothing like that face-to-face connection, right, where you can actually discuss things with people, show them things, get their hands on things, see it, understand it, talk with you, ask you questions, maybe show you a project that they're working on. That human element here is really, really important. Seeking products projects that are featured in publications, that, again, as I mentioned before, that kind of peer influence is important, and it's came through with architects a bit more importantly than it did with the perception that building product manufacturers have about that. And because it's validity, it's credibility, right? It's just natural human nature. If you believe that you have seen a product being successfully used by a firm you respect in the kind of a project that you would like to be working on, or you also work on, that's very meaningful. Now, the next one, it's clear here that building product manufacturers do believe very strongly in their product manufacturers. Actually, that human interaction, but without that structure of the lunch and learn, it didn't score as strongly with the architects, and actually less so with the contractors. And then finally, it's that word of mouth of colleagues, again, where I think building product manufacturers perhaps over-ascribe influence to that versus the way that architects see it. I think the takeaway we have from this is that, to use that kind of undervalued marketing effort, like getting listed with building product apps and online catalogs or featured in industry publications, this is important stuff, right? This can be very peer influential, and please don't underrate that idea or write off that idea of lunch and learns. They're proving to be extremely valuable, right, to the architect. Number 5 here. Hey, most specifications are proprietary. In some cases, okay, but not all the time here. You can see between contractors and BPMs, or the contractors are the ones who are receiving these and the manufacturers wanting to get in on those, where you're seeing that there are proprietary specs versus an or equal spec versus an open spec. Big delta there around that or equal, right? There's a lot of opportunity to come in, and again, getting back to that idea of, do you have a product that's technically capable of meeting these requirements? They're so important. It was important to design firms. You could get their attention, and now here it is going to be super important in dealing with contractors, right? This is an or equal spec, right? Show me what you've got. Explain to me how effective it could be. Tell me why it is I should make the case to suggest it be replaced, and get the architect to approve that. So this opportunity that we see coming out of this is really about taking advantage of these potential product substitutions by making the case for your product to the GC, or in many cases it'll be the subcontractor, and in some cases it'll be a distributor who's working with the subcontractor or the GC, and it is in an influential position. So number 6 here, hey, cost is king, right? At the end of the day, hey, only the low-cost products are going to make the final cut anyway. All right? And that was fairly strongly believed in by the building product manufacturers, but not always the case here. As you can see, building product manufacturers, 79% saying at the end of the day, lower cost is going to carry the day, and it's less than half of the architects. Now, admittedly, contractors are scoring a little more highly on that, and so when you're talking about a potential replacement, it would probably be a good idea to speak with them in terms of the cost. But in terms of the architects, it's really not that strong, right? And you can see across here with the rest of these influencing factors and the kinds of things that people are going to want to talk about. Things like aesthetic appeal are going to be relatively low for the contractor, because that's really much more the architect's area of concern. And so, of course, the architect is going to have the strongest feeling about that. But that better technical there in the middle, boy, that just carries a lot of weight at the end of the day. So the opportunity here, it's really vital that your website can include some technical items like the spec sheets, like the certifications, like the performance data. Really make sure you're strongly conveying the technical requirements of your product so it can be considered all the way through the process. And it's a matter of you really don't have to give up on this. So number 7, contractors really have very little influence. Not necessarily true. we asked about the success rate of getting an alternative technical product approved, and then the success rate of getting design products approved. And we differentiated throughout this between technical products and design products. Design products meaning things which end up in the aesthetic appearance of a building, things which the user will see, and things which I will say from 20 years in architecture, you care very much about because they contribute to the aesthetics of the building, versus things which are much more technical. Still a lot of products, a lot of important products, right? But they're not seen as much, right? They're not contributing visually to the building itself. And there's some difference here between the impact and how these get dealt with. As you can see here with the contractors versus the BPMs, success rate of getting alternates approved. Contractors are actually saying, even with design products, they're actually far more successful getting those approved than BPMs assume. I mean, that BPM number dropped way off there because they're assuming, oh, well, you'll never convince that architect to do something in one of these areas where it's visible. Well, that's just not true, right? The numbers are pretty strong there. So when you look at this opportunity here, what is that point of differentiation to the GC, right? And you really do have an opportunity to justify it, not just for a technical product, right, but for a design-oriented product as well. Number 8 here around contractors will contact my distributors and suppliers, right? I kind of don't have to worry about that. They all know each other. My guys are all over these projects. I don't have to worry about it, right? To some extent, but you can see, contractors are looking for lots of different sources here. The sources for building product information that are used often or very often, 4 or 5 on a scale of 5 here. And people are looking in lots of different places, and it's not necessarily just going to be relying on your typical channel, right? Manufacturers personnel, that's where you're probably going to actually will get the most lift with the architects. But they're also, let's face it, they're looking at online sources all the time. Contractors, they're also very interested in other contractors and what they're doing, but the building product manufacturers are the ones who are kind of thinking that, geez, these influencing factors from their trusted colleagues, or for their other contractors are what's really carrying the day. And it's true to some extent, but not nearly so much as they think it is, right? So again, what we're trying to do is we're not here to say one side's right, one side's wrong. It's all about understanding, right? The more any of us and all of us can understand what each of us are thinking, we can all work more fluidly and in a more nimble fashion together. The opportunity here is you can see that there's a lot of online traffic, right? So ensure that your website has everything that contractors need to learn about your products, and especially be focused on that technical information. What is it that differentiates you, and why would that contractor want to be able to work with your product and consider you to be an or equal, which they're looked at in the earlier slide there to be a big opportunity for. And lastly, it's, all right, a whole set of products got spec, and how many of those actually make it into the final project? How many of those actually end up getting installed? And this was pretty amazing results here, where the 75 to 90% actually end up getting put in, according to almost half of the architects out there. And in some cases, you can see there on the left, over 90% makes it through. BPMs really had much more of a pessimistic view about that. And so again, all we're trying to do here is make sure everybody understands the opportunity is very strong all the way through. Things which do get specified, according to the architects, you got 48 and 17% together saying that more than 3/4 of what they put in there actually ends up getting in the job, right? So it's important to get specified. There are still opportunities to change that because an awful lot of those are or equal specifications, right? But it's not really worthy of this kind of pessimistic view that building product manufacturers had about how much stuff actually makes it into the final job. So in this opportunity, it's really about finding ways for architects to learn more about your product before that spec gets written. The more you can get upstream, the more you can get spec'd in, you actually do have a pretty good chance of staying with it. Now, we saw that there's a lot of open spec, right, and we saw there's a lot of or equal, but you still have a pretty good shot of getting installed if you can get there upstream. So we're here to help you in any way possible. I invite you to come to construction.com at any time. Most of the research projects that I work on are all up there, and they're all for free. There's a lot of other resources for you. There's a phone number here that you can call to always find out how Dodge can help customize any kind of solutions for you. Let's work with some of the questions that have come in now. I've got a question here. Do you have any advice getting the attention of the purchaser for the wood doors on commercial construction projects? What's the best way to get the information in front of them? And I think, having spec'd a lot of wood doors in my life, I was very influenced by seeing them beautifully installed on other projects. You know, getting back to how influential that was in the statistics there, that can be a very powerful thing to do in terms of making sure people understand how great your product looks in its final condition. We did have a question here about how we define project start. For us, when we talk about start, technically that is when the construction actually starts, when we're looking at our Dodge numbers for the industry. But in this instance, what we're thinking about project starting is when the design begins. So that's this for this process. Someone else asked for BPM, and I apologize for using that without explaining it. That's building product manufacturer, right? So there's several questions here about whether or not copies of this presentation will be available. This will be recorded. It'll be on our website, and so it'll be easy to get to it afterwards. And if you missed some of this, if I went too quickly for you, please, take your time and go back through it. No problem with that. So there was an interesting question about social media here, and we didn't get into that, but we're constantly doing research on all sorts of topics, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably be getting into the role of social media in some of our research, maybe even this year. So someone's asked a question here about their products being used underground in water systems. So they deal with consulting civil engineers rather than architects. And do we believe that the data would apply to those kinds of things? That's certainly a technical product. I think from my experience that engineers are going to behave very much the same. I believe that we're seeing architects doing. I think the process of design and how a design professional goes about selecting will be similar. I would think that the technical performance is going to be even stronger. Certainly the aesthetics is not what's going to be carrying the day, but the technical performance will be even stronger. But again, don't assume that just because a firm isn't familiar with you that they don't want to use you. Don't assume that they're not interested in new products. And don't assume that if you'll take the time to listen to what they actually need on a project, that they wouldn't seriously consider you, nor for the contractor. I think that would apply just as well. So I think that's about all the questions that we have. We do have a question for you guys, and so if you would push out that poll question, please, I'd appreciate that. And one more question did come in about the geography, so I'll make sure you all understand this was in the United States. So the poll question is almost completed. I still see some folks are coming in on that, so we'll give another moment. Great. Thank you all. Appreciate that. So again, we're available. Construction.com is a great resource with an awful lot of good information. There's a phone number for you. You can reach me at any time you want to at steve.jones@construction.com, and I'm happy to talk with you about this. I'm very interested in these sorts of topics and would like to talk with any of you about any more you'd like to know about it, or perhaps some additional ideas you have about things we can do in the future. So with that, have a successful and prosperous day, and I look forward to talking to you all in the future. Bye-bye now.